Anastasia sat 2 rows from the back, gripping the edge of the wooden pew so tightly her knuckles whitened. She hadn't even made it through the first hymn when she heard someone hiss behind her. She shouldn't be here. She turned just enough to see Mikhail, Nikolai's older brother, standing. His voice was loud enough for the entire church to hear. She broke him. You all know it. Heads turned. Whispers spread like sparks on dry grass. Anastasia's stomach tightened. Then she heard her, Tatiana, Nikolai's wife. Anastasia hadn't seen her walk in, but she recognized her voice from the videos. She stepped into the aisle, pointed straight at Anastasia. She's not family. She doesn't belong here. We should throw her out. Anastasia didn't move. She couldn't. Her chest burned. Her palms were sweating. She couldn't tell if it was guilt, anger, or both. Then came the worst one. Yelena, Nikolai's mother, stood slowly from the front pew. She was wearing a black hat with a tiny veil. And even from rows away, Anastasia could feel the cold in her stare. She's the reason he died. Anastasia had never been directly blamed before. Not by them. Not like this. For a moment, the entire church fell silent. The only sound was the quiet sobbing of someone she couldn't see. She felt dozens of eyes pressing down on her, judging, condemning, dismissing her. She stood. She had to. She couldn't sit there one more second. She was about to leave, ready to push past anyone who tried to stop her, when Father Dmitri raised a hand and stepped forward. Wait, his voice was firm, measured. Everyone stopped. He cleared his throat and said, Nikolai left a letter. He wrote it before he passed. It's addressed to one person. He wanted it read today. He paused, opened a thin envelope, and looked directly at Anastasia. It's for Anastasia Petrov. Her breath caught. The letter was for her. The church went still. Even the crying stopped. Everyone stared, but no one said a word. She hadn't spoken to Nikolai in months. She didn't know he'd written anything, especially not for her. Father Dmitri extended the letter toward her. He asked that you read it in your own voice here today. Anastasia looked down at the envelope. Her name written in Nikolai's handwriting stopped her breath. She knew that slanted script like she knew his laugh. She used to tease him for how he looped his Her fingers closed around the paper. It felt heavier than it should have. The church was so quiet she could hear the building creak with the wind outside. No one moved. No one spoke. This was the moment. The one she didn't know she was walking into when she came to say goodbye. She hadn't come here to fight. She hadn't come for closure. She didn't even know why she came. But she was about to read the last words Nikolai ever wrote. And no one in that room, not even the people who hated her most, was ready for what he had to say. When she woke up that morning, Anastasia told herself she wasn't going. She told herself a dozen times. She even got dressed for work, tied her scrubs, packed a protein bar in her bag like any other day. But her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She stared at the calendar on her fridge where she'd circled the funeral date in red ink. It looked like blood. She sat on her kitchen floor for 20 minutes, just holding her car keys. Her cat brushed against her leg, but she didn't move. Her chest felt tight, like she couldn't get a full breath. Every memory she had of Nikolai played in loops. His crooked smile when she brought him pie after a night shift. The scar on his chin from falling off his bike at 10. The way he said her name like a question, even when he was sure of everything else. They hadn't spoken in 13 months. When they broke up, it wasn't quiet. It was a fire, screaming, slammed doors. He begged her to stay, then cursed her when she didn't. She told him she couldn't fix him, and he told her she never really tried. She walked out with nothing but her purse and a single shoebox of their things. She never went back. 3 months after that, he married Tatiana. Anastasia found out through Instagram. Someone tagged her in a photo. She stared at it for so long the screen went dark. It felt like grief, but not the kind anyone lets you mourn. She spent the next year trying to forget. She buried herself in 12-hour shifts at the ER. She volunteered for holidays. She picked up graveyards and doubles. She went home, slept, and started over. She told everyone she was fine. She even started dating again. But no one lasted longer than a few weeks. She was always looking for something familiar and dreading the second she found it. She didn't even know he was gone until Nadia told her. Nadia was her older sister. She still talked to some of Nikolai's friends, mostly through her husband. She called Anastasia on a Tuesday night. Her voice was too calm. "Anastasia, Nikolai passed." She remembered the moment Nadia said it. She was standing in her bathroom, brushing her teeth. She spit into the sink and stared at her reflection for a long time before whispering, "What do you mean?" "He died 2 days ago. They found him in his apartment. It was suicide." Everything went silent after that. She couldn't hear her sister. She sat on the toilet lid and stared at the floor until the screen on her phone went dark again. For the next 2 days, she didn't tell anyone. She didn't even cry. She didn't move unless she had to. She didn't go to work. She stared at the ceiling and asked questions she couldn't answer. She thought about the letter she never sent, the apology she never made, the part of her that still wanted to call him when she heard something funny. That part had never gone away. When the funeral invitation came, she wasn't surprised. It was a mass email list, not a personal request. Still, she stared at it for an hour. She didn't RSVP. She just showed up. She told herself she'd sit in the back, pay her respects, and leave before anyone noticed. She didn't come to stir anything. She wasn't there to reopen wounds. She walked in just as the organ started. She recognized people from the old neighborhood, a few nurses Nikolai used to work with, his aunt from St. Petersburg. Everyone looked straight ahead, dressed in black, eyes heavy with grief. And then there was the front row Mikhail, who looked exactly the same, clean-shaven, tightly wound like a wire stretched to its limit. Tatiana beside him in a black dress, with a satin belt, clutching a damp tissue. Yelena with her hands folded tightly in her lap. Anastasia took the second-to-last row, quiet, invisible. She kept her eyes down and told herself she could make it through an hour. But she should have known that grief isn't quiet, and nothing about Nikolai ever ended simply. Because just 20 minutes into the service, everyone in that front row turned their pain on her. Every word aimed like a knife. Every stare a silent accusation. And then the priest said her name. That was the moment everything changed. When Father Dmitri said her name, she didn't understand at first. It sounded foreign in the quiet, like it belonged to someone else. But then he repeated it, Anastasia Petrov. Every head in the church turned. Eyes scanned the pews until they landed on her. Some widened in recognition, others narrowed with disgust. Father Dmitri stepped forward, holding a white envelope. It looked crisp, like it had been handled with care. His voice was calm but clear. Nikolai left a letter. He asked that it be read aloud today by Anastasia, in her own words. Her heart jumped, her legs locked. The room swayed slightly. She tried to breathe deeply, but each breath caught in her throat like a hiccup of panic. She didn't know he'd written anything. She certainly didn't expect this. Tatiana gasped, sharp and bitter. He left something for her? Why would he write to her? Mikhail stood before she could say more. This isn't right, he said, glaring at the priest. This was his funeral. He didn't want her at the end of his life. She shouldn't be here for any of it. The room buzzed with whispers again. Anastasia could feel them. The nurses from his station, the neighbors, people who once smiled at her, now avoiding eye contact or staring with cold curiosity. She was the disruption, the outsider, the ex who didn't belong. Yelena stood too, slow and trembling. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut straight through the noise. She is the reason my son is dead. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a theory. It was a sentence, a final judgment. Anastasia's body flinched like she'd been slapped. She swallowed hard, blinked fast, and looked away. No one came to her defense. No one said a word. But Father Dmitri didn't budge. "He gave this to me personally," he said gently but firmly. "He asked that this letter be part of his service. I will honor his wishes." Then he walked down the aisle and handed her the envelope. It felt warm in her hands, like it had been sitting close to his chest. Her name was on the front, written in Nikolai's handwriting that slanted of that loopy P. She had loved the way he wrote her name. It felt like he always took his time with it. She looked up. Every pair of eyes was on her. She wanted to run. She wanted to disappear. She wasn't prepared for any of it. Not their hatred, not the letter, not the weight of being pulled back into a story she'd fought to step out of. But something inside her, maybe pride, maybe guilt, forced her to stand. Her fingers shook as she opened the envelope. She unfolded the paper slowly. Nikolai's handwriting filled the page in blue ink, clean and deliberate. She scanned the first line and almost sat back down. It was too much, too personal. But she knew she couldn't walk away now. Not after everything. Not after they blamed her. If Nikolai had chosen her for this moment, she owed him the courage to face it. So she cleared her throat and began. "Anastasia, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. First, I'm sorry for putting you in this position. I didn't do it to make things harder. I did it because I trust you to speak the truth." There was a rustle of movement in the church, but no one interrupted. She kept reading. "I don't know what people will say about me, but if they say you broke me, they're wrong. You didn't destroy me. I was already unraveling long before we met. You were the only thing that made me feel whole." She stopped. Her throat tightened. Her eyes blurred. She blinked hard and looked up at the ceiling for a second. Then she kept going. "You left because I stopped fighting. I became the version of myself I swore I'd never be. I lied. I lashed out. I stopped healing and started hiding. You didn't give up on me. I gave up on myself. And you chose to survive. I never stopped loving you." That's why it hurt so much. There was a small gasp. She didn't know if it was Tatiana or someone else. She kept reading. She would finish what he asked her to. And as she stood in front of a church filled with blame, she realized something. This letter wasn't just about Nikolai. It was a mirror for all of them. Every person who had failed him, including her. But the truth didn't belong to one person. It was finally out in the open. And no one could unhear it. Her hands were trembling as she turned the page. The church remained silent, but the tension grew heavier with every word she read. She knew most of the people there hated her. She knew some of them would never forgive her, no matter what Nikolai had written. But she wasn't reading for them. She was reading for him and for herself. She took a breath and kept going. "I married Tatiana because I wanted to forget you. That was never fair to her. I thought if I created something new, I could erase the pain of losing what we had. But all I did was build a wall between myself and the world. And no matter how high I built it, you were still there on the other side." A quiet sob broke the air. She didn't look to see who it was. She stayed focused. Her voice was steady now. Not because she wasn't hurting, but because the weight of his words held her up like scaffolding. "There's so much I didn't say to you, Anastasia. I know I made you feel small. I made you carry my storms. I expected you to fix what I refused to face. But you were never the problem. I was." The paper shook slightly between her fingers. She pressed her thumb to the corner to stop it from fluttering. "I didn't write this to make you feel guilty. I wrote it to give you back your truth. You didn't abandon me. You gave me every chance. You showed me more love than I ever deserved. I destroyed it, and you walked away to save yourself. That wasn't weakness. That was strength." She felt the words sink into the room like water into dry ground. People shifted uncomfortably. Some looked down. Few stared at her, unreadable. "I told my family you left me. I let them believe it was all your fault. I didn't correct them because it was easier to be pitted than to take responsibility. I let the lie grow until even I believed it. At that, she saw Mikhail lower his head. He didn't speak, but something changed in his face. It wasn't anger anymore. It was confusion, maybe shame. The air in the church changed. She could feel it. The hostility wasn't gone, but it had cracked. And that crack was spreading. I don't know what happens after this. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But if there's one thing I want people to remember, it's this. Anastasia didn't break me. She saved me as long as she could. And then she saved herself. That's what I hope you'll all learn to do, because I couldn't. Her voice finally wavered. Her throat burned, but she forced the last lines out. I'm sorry and I love you. You don't owe me anything, but I hope you forgive me someday. If nothing else, remember the cabin. Remember the stars. That was real. That will always be real. When she finished reading, she lowered the letter and stood frozen in place. She didn't know what to expect, tears, yelling, maybe someone storming out, but no one said anything. Father Dmitri stepped beside her. He didn't take the letter. He didn't speak. He simply put a hand on her shoulder and stood with her for a moment, like a pillar. She wanted to sit down. She wanted to disappear again. But something inside her had shifted. She looked over at Tatiana. Her mascara was smeared. Her eyes were red. She didn't glare. She didn't speak. She just stared at the casket. Mikhail looked at her and then at the floor. His jaw clenched, but his posture had softened. Even Yelena sat in still silence. Her hands, once folded in judgment, now gripped the edge of the pew like she needed something to hold on to. For a long time, no one moved. Then Father Dmitri cleared his throat. Nikolai lived a life filled with struggle, but also with deep love. Today we heard part of that love in his own words. I believe that deserves to be honored. He gestured gently toward the casket. Let us continue. Anastasia walked back to her seat. Her legs were unsteady, but she kept her head high. She could still feel their stares, but now they carried something new. Curiosity, hesitation, something close to regret. And in that moment, she realized she had just done what she couldn't do while Nikolai was alive. She had spoken the truth. And for the first time since his death, she felt something close to peace. The funeral continued, but nothing felt the same after the letter. The air had changed. The people had changed. Even the silence sounded different. She sat there, gripping the folded paper in her lap, trying to make sense of the fact that Nikolai was gone. And yet somehow he had spoken more truth from a coffin than he ever did when he was alive. Father Dmitri read a short sermon about grief and guilt. She didn't remember most of it. Her mind was still spinning from the words she'd read. She kept hearing them again in her head. You didn't abandon me. You gave me every chance. You showed me more love than I ever deserved. For a year, she had carried a secret fear that she had broken him. She left because she had to. She left because she couldn't be pulled down with him. But she never stopped wondering if walking away had pushed him over the edge. The guilt had wrapped itself around her ribs and stayed there, tight and quiet, until today. Now that guilt was cracking, slowly, painfully, but clearly. The final hymn ended. People began to rise. The service was over, but no one rushed out. They moved slowly, eyes glancing back at her, faces softer than before. A few nodded gently, unsure if they should say something or not. She stayed seated until nearly everyone had left. She couldn't bring herself to stand. She looked at the casket surrounded by flowers and photographs. She hated that it had come to this. She hated that he was gone. But she also felt something unexpected, relief. Not because he was dead, but because she finally had the truth. As she stood to leave, Mikhail appeared beside her. He didn't speak right away. His jaw was tight, his arms folded. He looked like he was preparing for battle, but his voice was quiet. I was wrong about you. She waited, unsure if there was more coming. He took a breath. I thought you abandoned him. That's what he told me. He never said anything else. And after he died, I needed someone to blame. He looked at the letter still in her hand. I read the first version. It didn't say any of that. What you read, he must have written it later. Maybe the night before. I didn't even know he left another one. There was pain in his eyes and maybe shame. I'm sorry, Anastasia, for what I said, for how I treated you. She nodded, not ready to say anything back. Not yet. Tatiana stood a few feet behind him. She didn't approach. She just watched. Her face was hollow, tired. But when their eyes met, she didn't look away. She walked over slowly. Her voice was fragile. He never talked about you. Not really. But I could feel you in everything. Anastasia didn't respond. There was nothing to say that wouldn't open another wound. Tatiana looked at the casket and said, I hope you find peace from this. Somehow Anastasia wanted to hate her. She thought she would, but now, standing there with all of them broken in different ways, she just felt tired. Yelena stood in the far corner of the church, hands clenched in front of her. She hadn't moved since the service ended. She watched Anastasia, but not with hatred anymore. Her eyes were wet, her face unreadable. She didn't speak to her. She just gave her a small, reluctant nod. That was all Anastasia would get from her, and it was enough. Outside, the sun had come out. People gathered in small clusters near the steps, talking softly. Some glanced her way, but no one said anything cruel. She stepped into the light, feeling like she was walking out of something heavy and endless. She didn't feel absolved. This wasn't a movie. There was no clean ending, no perfect closure. But Nikolai had given her something no one else could, his truth, his acknowledgement, and that mattered more than she realized. As she walked to her car, she pulled out her phone and opened her notes app. She typed one line, I forgive you. Then she deleted it. Not because she didn't mean it, but because she didn't need to send it. He already knew. For the first time in over a year, she breathed without guilt pressing down on her chest. And in that breath, she felt him let go. A week after the funeral, Anastasia drove north to the lake where she and Nikolai had once stayed in a rented cabin for their anniversary. They'd spent 3 days there wrapped in blankets and too much red wine, falling asleep to the sound of rain against the roof. They talked about coming back every year. They never did. She parked at the trailhead just before sunset. The sky was streaked with amber and pale pink. The air was crisp and quiet. She brought the letter with her, folded neatly in her jacket pocket, along with a small paper bag filled with wildflower seeds. Nikolai once told her he believed in growing things after death. He used to say, when I go, I hope something beautiful grows out of the mess I leave behind. At the time, she laughed and told him he was being dramatic. Now she understood. She followed the path to the overlook where they'd taken a photo together that still sat buried deep in her old phone gallery. She sat down on a flat rock and opened the bag. She scattered the seeds across the dirt and whispered a quiet thank you, not for the pain, not for the loss, but for the truth, for the chance to finally put it down. The past year had been a blur of blame and silence. She'd spent so long wondering if she was the villain in his story that she forgot she was the one who survived it. She'd shrunk herself to fit other people's grief, let their anger define her. She stopped trusting her memory of who they were because their version was louder. But that day in the church, Nikolai gave her back her voice. His words were messy and imperfect, but they were honest. They were enough. Since the funeral, she'd started talking to a therapist again. She deleted all the old messages she kept rereading. She cleared out the last box of his things that she never had the courage to throw away. She called her mother for the first time in months and told her she was okay. She didn't know if that was fully true yet, but it was more true than it used to be. She thought grief was a room you never fully leave. You just rearrange the furniture until you can breathe again. And that's what she was doing. breathing, rearranging, letting the light in where the walls once stood. Tatiana didn't reach out after the funeral, and Anastasia didn't expect her to. They were both part of the same story, but their chapters were different. She wished her healing. She wished her space to rewrite her ending. As for Mikhail, he sent a short message 2 days after. It just said, "Thank you for reading it. I get it now." She didn't reply, not because she was angry, but because she knew those words cost him more than she could answer. Even Yelena surprised her. A week later, a card arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single sentence: "He loved you." "I see that now." There was no signature. She didn't need one. Life hadn't suddenly become perfect. She still thought of Nikolai every day. She still woke up with questions that would never be answered. But the weight was different now. It wasn't a chain around her chest. It was a stone she carried in her pocket, smooth and familiar. Some days, she talked to him, not because she believed he was listening, but because some love is too big to keep locked inside. She told him when a patient pulled through. She told him when she tried a new recipe and ruined it. She told him when the leaves started changing and the world felt new again. He was gone, but he left something behind. Not just a letter, but a kind of clarity. A reminder that the truth matters, that walking away from someone doesn't mean you stop loving them. That surviving isn't betrayal. She stood on that overlook until the last light slipped behind the trees. Then she turned and walked back to her car. Not whole, but healing. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she owed anyone an apology. Hi besties, thank you so much for watching to the end. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Bye.